You're listening to Give God 90, where we're not afraid of the hard biblical questions because we dig through the language, the culture, and the history to find the truth revealed in the words of our Creator.
See the light. I want to see the light.
Hey everyone, welcome to Give God 90. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. We are live on a Monday morning, and I will give you fair warning right away that it's a busy household here today. The grandchildren are here doing their remote learning. The area of the country that we are in is going back into what many would consider lockdown. And so they're here. So if you hear strange noises or anything, I will be sure to appropriately embarrass the proper one in front of all of my listeners as I get strange looks from the oldest. Let me thank you once again for joining us. It is an honor to have you let us be part of your time. Also, don't forget, if you go to givegod90.com, there's all kinds of good stuff there. You can find my books. You can find all kinds of great information. We have some affiliate memberships of some things that we take care of that help take care of us as well. And don't forget, there's a little donate button down there too for you folks that like to have something to do with your finances. There's a whole lot of things we need to talk about today, but I want to concentrate on one just because it is timely. And that is, of course, this concept of what we are hearing about in the news, especially today, because today is December 21st, 2020, and everybody's talking about this thing called the Christmas star. And I'm going to tell you right off the front, this isn't it, okay? That's just all there is to it. This is not the Christmas star. This is something completely different. This, as you will see when we get into it here, I don't know why it gets so, what's a good word I want to use? Over-dramatized, I guess, is a good word to use. And in the over-dramatization that we see of this, what you're going to figure out, what you're going to hear, what you're going to learn is why that is. And, of course, as we continue with this, we're going to let's just dive right in here. This year we see Jupiter and Saturn, and they appear to meet in the sky. Of course, that's not something that they do. What happens is they don't actually meet. They just kind of cross. And depending on where on the planet Earth you're looking from, you see them cross at various times in various ways. Just because it happens to be on December 21st, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. And it happens about once every 20 years. We'll get into more of that in a minute. And this time it's actually happening from what I can determine, and I'm not an astronomer, okay? I'm certainly not an astrologer, but they're meeting in the constellation of Capricorn. Now, while this does promise to be a great spectacle in the sky, it's something certainly worth looking if it's not cloudy and you can look out and see it in your part of the world. That's a great thing, right? But it's not what the wise men saw 2,000 years ago, as we read in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, when he writes, and I'm going to read this from King James this time. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and are come to worship him. Okay. Now, there's a couple of clues right off the get-go that we can know that what we're seeing now is not what they saw. What we see now is occurring in the southern sky, not the eastern sky, And the scripture tells us right in Matthew, or Matthew records, I should say, that they saw the star in the east, meaning in a different constellation, different part of the sky. So we really should ask ourselves a question here. How did these wise men know what this sign was? How did they understand? What did we figure out from what is being told to us throughout Scripture that gives us any information how these guys knew what to look for, where to go, and what to do? You see, we underestimate some things. When we put Scripture together, it's not just reading, Matthew 1 and 2 and making a determination or interpreting what we think he meant. We can go back and look and see places where this comes together. One of the things we do is we go back to Genesis, like I always like to do, right? I always go back to Genesis. If we look in Genesis chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, the Almighty said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide night from day. Let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years. Let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth," and it was so. Now, knowing that these signs exist, they're going to be given to us, we need to understand them. And knowing what they are and understanding them are two different things. I can know the difference between right and wrong, but do I really understand the difference between right and wrong? Sometimes, and I don't know if you've ever heard the term, you can do the wrong thing for the right reason. And you can also do the right thing for the wrong reason, right? So knowing that, what we see and hear when we look at these things, we have to be very discerning when we hear what's going on, when we see these reports of what's going on. When the Creator placed those lights in the sky to show us his appointed times, he also said, they're for signs and for wonders. But do we understand what those signs and wonders are? What does any particular sign or wonder mean? These wise men looked up and they observed something that had never happened before. What they actually saw was Saturn and Jupiter. Okay? Saturn and Jupiter typically display their conjunction approximately every 20 years. Now, if it had never happened before, but it happens every 20 years, how could they have never seen it before? How did they understand and know what to look for? They were used to seeing this. These people were basically astronomers, not astrologers, astronomers. Astrology is when you look at the stars and you say, oh, this must mean I should do that. No, what they're looking at is the course of the orbits of the planets and the stars and the Earth through the solar system. And they didn't have a lot of the equipment we have today, but they also didn't have a lot of the interference that we have today, okay? So how did they know what to look for? Well, the best way to know what to look for is to go back and find when we see a messenger directly from the throne room of heaven give information. And in this particular instance, talking about the star, we don't have to go back any farther than Daniel. Because in Daniel chapter 9, verses 21 and 22, we read, "Yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time of the evening oblation. And he informed me." Gabriel informed me, and I continue, and he talked with me and said, "O Daniel, I am now come to give you skill and understanding." So, and he goes on to lay out all of the information about the coming Messiah and the things that must happen. All of the information. what Gabriel told Daniel was to watch. Something was going to happen, but it was going to be something that had never happened before. It was going to be something so spectacular in the course of history. Since creation, this had never happened. Now, if Jupiter and Saturn, they kind of come together, not in as close a proximity as some of us are going to see today, but very close. If that happens every 20 years, that's happened before in the course of human history. What Daniel was told to look for was when Jupiter and Venus conjoin, and then there's a third conjunction with Regulus. And they meet between the feet of the lion. Okay? Only happened once in human history, and that was near the end of the year 1 BC. It was in the fall of the year, not during the winter solstice. Daniel lived in Babylon for almost 85 or 90 years. He had been a governor, pretty much in charge of a lot of things most of that time. He had amassed a lot of wealth. He was a eunuch. He couldn't have children. He had no one to give his wealth to. Daniel passed his knowledge on to the Chaldean astronomers in Babylon. They said, he told them, you watch for this sign. You see this. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to take my money, go find this baby, and give it to him. And, it's amazing. It's amazing. You take this money and you give it to this baby boy who will be born in Bethlehem, right? Now, the astronomers followed, the instructions left by Daniel. They converted his wealth into gold and frankincense and myrrh. They needed to secure permission from their king to travel, right? They needed to find a safe way to travel, which meant they had to hire a security team. Basically, it was a 500-mile journey. It was a 500-mile journey that was very uncertain. They didn't know, they knew when they saw the star. They knew that they had to take this wealth and exchange it into something they could carry. They had to get permission from their king. That takes time. And they had to travel 500 miles. The wise men were not there, okay, the night this baby was born. It just doesn't work that way. No matter what you feed a camel, he cannot travel 500 miles in just a couple of hours. They weren't fighter jets. Okay, now think about this. When they, on their journey, on this 500-mile journey, where they're going to make traveling across the desert somewhere between 20 to 30 miles a day, it takes time. They didn't know if this child would have succumbed to some kind of disease or had been killed by somebody. They didn't know what they were going to find when they got there. They just knew they had a job to do, and they went to do it. The few words that we have dedicated in the Bible to, and really it's a miraculous lesson. Really, it truly is. It leaves a lot to the imagination, doesn't it? And the legends that accompany this miracle, they are wild beyond our imagination. They're even beyond, some of these legends are beyond miraculous, right? Again, I'm not an astronomer, but I can get on the NASA website today, and I can research these things, and I can see that these conjunctions are. And thankfully, NASA has done most of the calculations. We know when certain things happen. We can, what we call backtrack orbits. In other words, we can calculate them backwards to see where they were and how they were. With so much information, with all of the technology we have at our fingertips today, why? And this question needs to be asked. Why would people fall for this false prophecy that's so easily disputed about this particular year being able to see the Christmas star at a time of year that it didn't happen? Yeshua was not born in the winter. He was born in the fall. Why would people fall for this false prophecy that's so easily disputed? Well, it's simple. The enemy himself, he wants to disrupt our worship of the truth. He wants us to lose our relationship with the Almighty. This misdirection not only affects believers, but it really affects non-believers. It points them in a direction it does not lead to the Creator, but it leads them away from the true Creator. It leads them to worship something that isn't real. See, they get this image in their mind of this little baby Jesus in a manger with these wise men kneeling down to this child, this newborn child, might I add, when it took them such a long time to accomplish it. Even Matthew later records in chapter 2 that they finally find the child in a house. Okay, now, Mary and Joseph didn't live in Bethlehem. They were there for a reason. And then they had to go back home. So even though he may have been born in Bethlehem, the house of bread, by the way, now they turn around and take him back to where they make their living, right? Back to home. It's like, okay, I go here for a purpose. I return home and continue my life, continue my work. It took the wise men time, even after they get to Jerusalem, they introduce themselves, they attempt to get a audience with Herod. That takes time. You don't just walk into a king's chambers unannounced, right? It takes time. It would be like, it would be sort of like if a group of people from Quebec, and this is a little extreme, traveled to Washington, D.C., and they expected to walk into the White House and meet with whoever the president might be at the time. That just doesn't happen. You have to make the proper arrangements. Now, all of that took approximately 2 years. We know that because when Herod heard this news, he ordered all of the children 2 years old and younger to be killed. So he had a timeline to go by. He understood what it was. He knew what the story was. It was all coming together right there in front of probably one of the most evil people in history. Herod was not a nice guy. He had his own family members killed so they could not assume the throne. He hoped to live forever. And if you actually read the accounts of his last few years, he was not a healthy person at all. He was being misdirected. He was being confused. He was being used by evil. And he didn't mind it. Okay, he did not mind that at all. You see, by allowing this false prophecy to continue, it really promotes leading someone to worship a false god. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stand, or I'm actually sitting here as I speak to you today, and I'm going to sit here and tell you, I'm not going to promote that. I'm going to explain to you, as I just have, the difference between something that happens every 20 years and something that has happened one time in history. As all of the Earth orbits the sun, as all of the planets, revolve and rotate and go through their courses, as this solar system we're in passes through the universe, okay? As all of that happens, one time in human history, one time in the history of creation, has a single conjunction been so important. And that was, by the way, the star that we know as Regulus is the king star. The king star between the feet of the lion. Are you beginning to understand where that term comes from now? The lion of the tribe of Judah. Do you understand now why it's so important that we must not follow these false prophecies? We can't believe the false teachings. Because if we did, we would see Saturn and Jupiter, not Regulus and Venus and Jupiter. If we believe the false prophecy, we would say, these wise men, 20 years later after Daniel died, they'd be knocking on the king's door saying, where is he? And it wasn't ready yet. But because the message comes from the throne room to Daniel, to the wise men almost 400 years later, how many miracles are you looking for? How many miracles do you see in this story? All of these things must come into play. All of these things are recorded in Scripture if you are willing to go find them. If you're willing to go find them. So, is there a meaning to the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn? Is there some sign or some wonder there? I really don't know. If there is, I should say, that information has probably been lost to history. We have corrupted history with tradition and with legends and with false doctrine and false prophecy to the point where we no longer have access to the truth. It's probably in Scripture somewhere if we would know where to go look for it. But you have to be able to uncover it. You have to be able to see it. Now, I'm certain, okay, I'm going to say this way. I am certain if someone wanted to research that in such a way, they would find the answer. But what they'd have to do is take the information that's available currently, okay, and you would back up every time that this happened in a certain way. Now, there are people who will say that it's been about 360 years or 800 years since this has happened. Well, not really. Since it's happened in such close proximity together, this conjunction where they're going to actually look like one new star. But they've been very, very close, and that occurs about every 20 years. So, and it depends, again, on where you're looking from Earth. Okay, which latitude you're in, right? So as you move from latitude to latitude, meaning north to south, it changes your perspective. So the thing that, as people research these things, they have to understand they can't always look at it from, like, New York City. Sometimes, and the best way, is to look at things, guess from where? Jerusalem. Absolutely. Because what happens in the United States happens in the United States. What happens in Israel is what's important. And if you don't think it's important, well, what happened in that land, 3,500 years ago? What happened in that land 2,200 years ago? What happened in that land? I could, pick a time in history. It's important what happens there because that is what affects the rest of the world. What happens in New York or Los Angeles or Sydney, Australia or Paris or London, wherever it may be, Beijing, China, Moscow, I don't care, is nowhere near as important as what happens in Israel. Because what happens in Israel affects the world. Always has, always will. This conjunction that we're going to see tonight, well, I'm not going to see it because it's cloudy and rainy here where I live. And it really, they're two planets that come together. I've seen, I have a very good spotting scope. I've seen the rings of Saturn. They're really cool. They truly, truly are. But honestly, unless you're on a mountaintop in Colorado or some other mountaintop where you don't have a lot of light pollution is what they call it, where you have city lights and street lights that bounce off the atmosphere, bounce off the air, and any of the dust particles that are floating in the air. If you can be out, and thankfully we had the opportunity to be out where we could look up in the sky and see. And and it was about 20 years ago when that occurred, because this once again where things were close enough to happen. And I set my spotting scope up one night and started looking, and sure enough, there's the rings of Saturn. And that's just from, me being able to do a little bit of research. Not a lot. Didn't put a lot of research time into it because from a believer's perspective, it's not that important. Now, there is something that's going to be occurring in the near future that is important. More on that in another time. And in the last few minutes that I want to take, I want to be very careful, and I need to probably devote here in a couple of months an entire show to this, because you may hear that we are beginning the age of Aquarius in, I believe it's February. I think the Fifth Dimension back in the 60s had a song, "This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius." They were looking forward to it 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago. Oh my, it's been that long. Think about this. That is astrology. Does our place in the solar system matter? Kinda. Does our place let me rephrase that. Does where we live on the earth matter? Kinda. Your national affiliation or your political affiliation or your geographic location, yeah, it can matter because it determines your perspective on things, right? But that's about as far as it goes. If you want to allow a star to rule your life, make sure it's the right one. Okay? And I'm not talking about a TV star. I'm not talking about some obscure planet, in science fiction world somewhere. And I'm not talking about a galaxy far, far away. If you give yourself over to astrology, you've gone too far. Just because you were born in a certain month or on a certain day does not mean that you are destined to live your life that way. I had this conversation with a very experienced, I guess is a good way to say it, doctor some time ago, And my argument is, look, everybody who's born in June is born in warm weather, right? At least in the northern hemisphere. If you're born in that warm weather and you come along in that season, then you're going to look at life a little differently than people who are born in December, who were born in cold weather in the northern hemisphere. And you're going to have a different viewpoint. You're going to look at things a little differently. You may see some things similarly, but other viewpoints you're going to have differently. It's not the stars that are guiding you. It is the time of year you were born and the things that you were first remembering as you come of age. And those typical seasonal things, they do affect you. They don't affect you. They can affect you positively. They can affect you negatively. But it's not your destiny. You're not destined by where a certain star was the day you were born. You are destined by following the instructions of your Creator. You find your destiny, you find your blessings, you find your skills when you follow His instructions. It's not rocket science. It's really quite simple. Don't confuse astronomy with astrology. They're two completely different things. Astronomy is the science of observation, of the movement of all of the, for lack of a better term, heavenly bodies. The planets, the stars, the earth, everything. While astrology attempts to tell you how to live according to the way the stars move, which is kind of weird when you think about it that way. But anyway, there's my final warning for today. Don't confuse astrology with astronomy. Maybe I will need to do a whole a whole episode on that. Maybe in February when we enter the dawn of Aquarius. You can tell that I don't take that very seriously at all. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to have you join me today, or allow me to join you today, I should say. As you continue your day and your week, let me say, I'm not sure that Thursday night we're going to do a live, but we'll think about it very seriously. I'll try to do it. Until next time, I wish you many, many blessings.